What Reba McEntire did for a terminally ill fan touched America's heart. The heart monitor's steady beeping was the only sound breaking the silence in room 302 of Millerville General Hospital. Sarah Thompson lay propped against starched white pillows, her once vibrant auburn hair now thin and brittle from months of chemotherapy treatments that had ultimately failed to stop the aggressive cancer spreading through her body. At 42 years old, she looked decades older, her face gaunt and pale, but her green eyes still held that spark of determination that had carried her through every challenge life had thrown her way. The walls of her small hospital room told the story of a woman who had found salvation in country music. Posters of Reba McEntire covered nearly every available surface, some dating back to the 1980s, when Sarah was just a teenager discovering the power of music to heal emotional wounds. Concert ticket stubs were carefully taped around the window frame like a paper memorial to happier times. A worn red bandana, the same style Reba wore during her early career, hung from the bedside lamp. On the rolling table beside her bed sat a stack of CD cases, their plastic covers scratched from years of love and repeated listening. Sarah's fingers traced the edge of a framed photograph showing her at a Reba concert 3 years ago, before the first symptoms appeared, before the devastating diagnosis that would change everything. In the picture, she was smiling broadly, wearing a sequined Western shirt, her arm around her 17-year-old daughter Jessica and 15-year-old son, Mark. They looked happy then, like a family that had weathered the worst storms and come out stronger on the other side. The divorce 10 years earlier had nearly destroyed her. When David walked out on their family for his secretary, Sarah thought her world was ending. She had been a stay-at-home mother for over a decade, with no recent work experience and 2 young children depending on her. The nights were the hardest, when the kids were asleep and the house felt enormous and empty. That was when she would put on her headphones and listen to Reba's music, finding strength in songs like Survivor and She Thinks His Name Was John. The lyrics spoke directly to her heart, reminding her that she was stronger than her circumstances. Now, as she faced something infinitely more terrifying than divorce, those same songs played softly from a small speaker on her nightstand. If you're reading this story and finding strength in music during your own difficult times, we'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Please subscribe to our channel and let us know where you're watching from. Your support means everything to families like Sarah's who are fighting their own battles. Sometimes knowing we're not alone makes all the difference in the world. Dr. Martinez had delivered the news 6 months ago with the kind of clinical detachment that medical professionals develop as a defense mechanism. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, 3 to 6 months. There were treatment options, he explained, but they would likely only extend her life by weeks rather than months, and the side effects would be brutal. Sarah had chosen to fight anyway, not for herself, but for Jessica and Mark. They needed their mother for as long as possible, even if that time was measured in days rather than years. The chemotherapy sessions had been hellish. Sarah would sit in the oncology ward for hours, poison dripping into her veins while she listened to Reba's greatest hits on repeat. Other patients complained about her music choice. They preferred silence or nature sounds, but Sarah didn't care. Reba's voice was her lifeline, the thread connecting her to all the times in her past when she had felt broken and somehow found the strength to rebuild. Jessica pushed through the heavy hospital door, balancing a cup of coffee and a small potted plant. At 17, she had inherited her mother's stubborn streak and striking green eyes, but where Sarah had always been soft-spoken and gentle, Jessica burned with an intensity that worried everyone who knew her. She had dropped out of her senior year of high school to spend every possible moment at the hospital, despite Sarah's protests. "Mum, look what I brought you," Jessica said, setting the small plant on the windowsill next to a ceramic figurine of a red-headed country singer. "Mrs. Henderson from the flower shop said it's supposed to bring good luck." Sarah smiled, though the effort seemed to drain her limited energy. "Honey, you should be in school. Your graduation is only 2 months away." "School can wait," Jessica replied firmly, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair that had become her second home. "I'm not leaving you alone in this place." Mark appeared in the doorway, looking uncomfortable in his oversized basketball jersey. At 15, he was tall and lanky like his father, but he had Sarah's gentle nature and quiet strength. Unlike his sister, who dealt with crisis by taking action, Mark retreated inward, processing his emotions through long silences and meaningful glances. "Hey, Mom," he said softly, approaching the bed with the careful movements of someone afraid of causing more pain. "How are you feeling today?" "Better now that my babies are here," Sarah whispered, reaching for both of their hands. "I have something I need to tell you both." Jessica and Mark exchanged worried glances. Their mother's tone suggested this was going to be one of those conversations they had been dreading. "Dr. Martinez came by this morning while you were getting coffee," Sarah continued, her voice barely audible above the hum of medical equipment. "The latest scans show the cancer has spread faster than they expected. He thinks I have maybe 3 weeks, possibly 4 if I'm lucky." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Jessica's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks despite her attempts to stay strong. Mark stared at the floor, his jaw clenched tight as he fought to maintain his composure. "There's something else," Sarah said, squeezing their hands tighter. "I know this might sound silly given everything that's happening, but I need to tell you about my last wish." She paused, gathering her courage for what she knew would sound like the desperate fantasy of a dying woman. "I want to meet Reba McEntire before I die." The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica looked up from her tears, confusion mixing with grief on her face. Mark finally met his mother's eyes, searching for some sign that she was joking. "Mum," Jessica began carefully, "you know that's probably not possible, right? She's famous. She doesn't just visit random people in hospitals." Sarah nodded, understanding their skepticism. "I know how it sounds, but her music has been with me through everything. Your father leaving, raising you two alone, and now this. I feel like she's been my closest friend for 25 years, even though we've never met. I just want the chance to thank her, to tell her how much her songs have meant to me." She reached for a worn notebook on her bedside table, its pages filled with handwritten lyrics and personal notes. "I've written down every concert of hers I've attended, every song that got me through a difficult day. Fancy gave me the courage to go back to work after the divorce. The greatest man I never knew helped me understand your father's limitations. Survivor became my anthem when I thought I couldn't take another step forward." Mark cleared his throat, his voice thick with emotion. "What do you want us to do, Mom?" "I want you to try," Sarah said simply. "I know it's a long shot, maybe impossible, but I need to know we tried everything. If I'm going to leave this world, I want to leave knowing that miracles are still possible, even if this one doesn't happen for me." Eleanor Hawkins, the head nurse on the oncology ward, had been listening from the doorway. She was a practical woman in her 50s who had seen hundreds of terminal patients make impossible requests in their final weeks. Usually she would gently redirect these conversations toward more realistic goals, video messages from grandchildren, visits from old friends, or simple comfort measures. But something about Sarah's quiet dignity and the desperate hope in her children's eyes made her pause. "Sarah, honey," Eleanor said, entering the room with the kind of professional sympathy that came from years of practice. "I understand how much this means to you. But celebrities like Reba McEntire have security teams and managers who protect them from thousands of requests every day. Maybe we could reach out to her fan club or try to get an autographed photo." Jessica stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "No, that's not enough. If my mum says she wants to meet Reba McEntire, then that's what we're going to try to make happen." "Sweetie, I admire your determination," Eleanor continued, "but you need to be realistic about this. Your mother is very sick, and false hope can sometimes be more cruel than honest acceptance." The words stung because they carried the weight of truth. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the familiar exhaustion that came with fighting both disease and disappointment. She had spent her entire adult life being practical, making sensible decisions, accepting limitations. Maybe this was just another limitation she needed to accept. But Jessica was already pulling out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen with the kind of focused intensity that had gotten her straight A's throughout high school. "Mark, help me figure out how to make a video," she said, ignoring Eleanor's disapproving expression. "We're going to tell Mom's story, and we're going to make sure the right people see it." As afternoon melted into evening, the small hospital room became a hive of activity that would set in motion events none of them could have imagined. Jessica had never been one to back down from a challenge. When she was 12, she had organized a neighborhood fundraiser to save the local animal shelter. When she was 14, she had successfully petitioned the school board to add more healthy options to the cafeteria menu. Now at 17, she was facing the biggest challenge of her life, and failure was not an option. "Mark, hold the phone steady," she instructed, positioning herself beside their mother's hospital bed. "We need good lighting and clear audio." Sarah watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. Jessica's determination was both her greatest strength and her most dangerous weakness. When she set her mind on something, she pursued it with a relentless intensity that had occasionally gotten her into trouble at school and with friends. "Honey, maybe we should think about this more," Sarah said weakly. "I don't want you to be disappointed if nothing comes of it." "Mom, stop," Jessica replied firmly, adjusting the angle of her phone camera. "You spent 10 years teaching Mark and me never to give up on the things that matter. This matters." The first video Jessica recorded was awkward and rambling. She stumbled over her words, got emotional halfway through, and had to start over 3 times. Mark, uncomfortable with the whole process, kept shifting the phone and creating shaky footage that made their mother look even more fragile than she already was. "This isn't working," Mark muttered after their 4th attempt. "Maybe Mrs. Hawkins is right. Maybe we should just accept that some things are impossible." Jessica whirled around to face her younger brother, her green eyes flashing with anger. "Don't you dare give up on Mom. Don't you dare suggest that her last wish doesn't matter just because it seems hard." "I'm not giving up," Mark protested. "I'm being realistic. Do you have any idea how many people probably try to contact famous people every single day? What makes you think we're special?" "Because Mom is special," Jessica shot back. "Because her story is real. And if Reba McEntire is half the person her song suggests she is, then she'll want to know about Mom." Sarah watched her children argue with the bittersweet knowledge that their disagreement came from the same place: love for her and fear of losing her. Mark's caution protected him from disappointment, while Jessica's optimism protected her from despair. Both approaches had merit, but neither would bring Reba McEntire to room 302. "What if we tried a different approach?" Sarah suggested quietly, her voice cutting through their heated exchange. "What if instead of asking for something, we just told the story? Let people know how much the music has meant to me, without making it about meeting her." Eleanor appeared in the doorway again, this time carrying Sarah's evening medications. She had been working the oncology ward for 15 years and had developed strong opinions about how families should spend their final weeks together. "I hope you're not still planning to waste precious time on this fantasy," she said, checking Sarah's chart with practiced efficiency. "There are more important things to focus on right now." "Like what?" Jessica challenged, her voice tight with frustration. "Like making memories," Eleanor replied, preparing a syringe with Sarah's pain medication. "Like talking about the good times you've shared. Like saying the things that need to be said before it's too late." The words hit harder than Eleanor probably intended. The truth was that Jessica and Mark had been avoiding those kinds of conversations, focusing instead on treatments and hope, and anything that didn't require them to acknowledge the inevitable. "We have time for both," Sarah said diplomatically, though she could feel her energy fading as the day wore on. "We can make memories and chase dreams at the same time." After Eleanor left, Jessica sat down heavily in her chair and stared at her phone screen. "Maybe she's right, Mum. Maybe I'm being selfish, trying to make your last weeks about some impossible quest instead of just being here with you." Sarah reached for her daughter's hand, surprised by how much effort the simple gesture required. "Jessica, look at me. Do you remember what you wrote in your college application essay last year?" Jessica nodded, confused by the apparent change of subject. "You wrote about how the most important thing I taught you was that hope is not passive," Sarah continued. "You said hope requires action, even when that action seems pointless to other people, especially then." She squeezed Jessica's fingers with what little strength she had left. "This video, this campaign, whatever you want to call it, it's not about whether Reba comes or not. It's about refusing to give up hope, even when everyone tells you to be practical. It's about fighting for something beautiful in the middle of something terrible." Mark had been listening quietly from his position by the window. Now he turned around, his expression thoughtful. "What if we each told part of the story? Like I could talk about how Mom's strength affected us as kids, and Jessica could talk about the music connection." For the first time since arriving at the hospital that morning, Jessica smiled. And Mom could tell some of the stories about how specific songs helped her through difficult times. They spent the next 2 hours creating a video that none of them could have made alone. Mark, despite his initial reluctance, proved to have a natural ability to frame shots and edit footage on Jessica's phone. Jessica's passion and articulate speaking style carried the emotional weight of their story. And Sarah, even in her weakened state, found the strength to share memories she had never spoken aloud before. The final video was 8 minutes long, longer than most social media experts would recommend, but filled with genuine emotion and specific details that made their story feel authentic rather than manipulative. Sarah talked about hearing "fancy" for the first time as a scared 19-year-old single mother, afraid she would never amount to anything. Jessica described watching her mother sing along to Survivor while cleaning house on Saturday mornings, transforming household chores into celebrations of resilience. Mark, surprising everyone, shared a memory of his mother crying to "the greatest man I never knew" after his father missed his 8th grade graduation, and how that song helped him understand that his father's absence was about David's limitations, not Mark's worth. They uploaded the video to YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok just after 9 o'clock that evening. Jessica wrote a heartfelt caption explaining their situation and used every hashtag she could think of related to country music, cancer awareness, and Reba McEntire. Then they waited. The first hour brought 3 views, probably just their own repeated watches. By midnight, they had 22 views, mostly from friends and family members who had seen Jessica's posts on her personal social media accounts. Sarah had fallen asleep, listening to "Sweet Dreams" on her headphones, but Jessica and Mark remained wide awake, refreshing their phones every few minutes. "This is stupid," Mark said around 1 in the morning. "Even if 1 million people watch this, what are the chances it gets to the right person? What are the chances she even sees it herself, instead of just some assistant who deletes it without watching?" Jessica was lying on the narrow cot the hospital had provided for family members, staring at the ceiling tiles that she had memorized over the past few weeks. "I don't know," she admitted. "But what's the alternative? Just accept that we can't even try?" Over the next 3 days, their video slowly gained traction. By Thursday morning, they had over 500 views and dozens of comments from strangers who had been moved by Sarah's story. People shared their own experiences with cancer, with Reba's music, with the power of hope in impossible circumstances. But views and comments wouldn't bring Reba McEntire to Millerville General Hospital. As Sarah's condition continued to deteriorate and her pain increased despite stronger medications, even Jessica began to wonder if Eleanor had been right about focusing on more realistic goals. What none of them knew was that 2,000 miles away in Nashville, Tennessee, a woman with red hair and tired eyes was having her own sleepless night, dealing with her own impossible grief, and scrolling through social media as a distraction from thoughts too painful to face directly. The notification that would change everything was still 3 days away, but the wheels of an extraordinary coincidence were already beginning to turn. Friday morning brought devastating news that would test the Thompson family's fragile hope. Dr. Martinez arrived earlier than usual, his expression grave as he reviewed Sarah's latest test results. The cancer had spread to her liver and lungs with an aggressive speed that surprised even his experienced medical team. "I'm afraid we need to revise our timeline," he said gently, pulling up a chair beside Sarah's bed. "Based on these scans, I think we're looking at days rather than weeks. I'm sorry." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Jessica, who had been checking their video's view count on her phone, nearly dropped the device. Mark stood frozen by the window, his reflection showing a young man trying desperately not to fall apart. Sarah herself seemed to shrink further into her hospital bed, as if the weight of this news was pressing her deeper into the mattress. "How many days?" she asked quietly. "It's difficult to say with certainty," Dr. Martinez replied. "Perhaps 5 to 7, possibly 10 if you respond well to increased pain management. I want you to know that we'll do everything possible to keep you comfortable." After the doctor left, the room fell into a heavy silence broken only by the increasingly rapid beeping of Sarah's heart monitor. Her body was fighting a battle it could not win, and everyone in that room knew it. "Mom," Jessica whispered, her voice cracking with emotion, "I'm so sorry. I wasted our time on this stupid video instead of just being here with you." Sarah turned her head slowly to look at her daughter. The effort clearly exhausted her, but her eyes remained bright with the fierce love that had carried their family through every crisis. "Don't you dare apologize for hope," she said firmly. "Don't you dare apologize for trying to make something beautiful happen in the middle of all this darkness." Over the weekend, their video began gaining momentum in ways none of them had anticipated. A popular country music blog had shared it with their 50,000 followers. A cancer support group on Facebook had posted it in their community of 200,000 members. By Sunday evening, they had over 15,000 views and hundreds of comments from people around the world who had been touched by Sarah's story. But 15,000 views still felt impossibly far from reaching Reba McEntire herself. Jessica had tried direct messaging every social media account associated with the singer, had emailed her management company, and had even called the customer service line for her fan club. Each attempt was met with polite, automated responses, thanking her for her interest and explaining that due to the volume of requests, individual responses were not possible. Meanwhile, Sarah's condition continued to deteriorate with frightening speed. She could barely stay awake for more than an hour at a time, and even simple conversations left her breathless and exhausted. The nurses had increased her morphine drip, which helped with the pain, but left her floating in and out of consciousness. On Monday morning, Eleanor found Jessica crying in the family lounge at 3 in the morning. The young woman had dark circles under her eyes and looked like she had not slept properly in days. "Honey, you need to go home and rest," Eleanor said, sitting down beside her. "Your mother needs you to be strong, and you can't be strong if you're running yourself into the ground." "I can't leave her," Jessica replied, wiping her eyes with a tissue that had seen too much use. "What if something happens while I'm gone? What if she asks for me and I'm not here?" Eleanor had had this conversation with countless family members over the years. The guilt and fear that came with potentially missing a loved one's final moments was one of the cruelest aspects of terminal illness. "Jessica, can I tell you something that might help?" Eleanor asked gently. "In my 15 years working this ward, I've learned that people often choose when to let go. They wait for the right moment when they feel their family is ready, when they've said what needs to be said. Your mother is not going anywhere while she knows you and Mark still need her." Back in Sarah's room, Mark was showing his mother the latest comments on their video. People from Australia, England, Canada, and Mexico had shared their own stories about how Reba's music had helped them through difficult times. A woman in Texas wrote about playing Survivor during her own cancer treatments. A man in Ohio described dancing to Fancy at his daughter's wedding because it was his late wife's favorite song. "Look at this, Mom," Mark said softly, reading from his phone screen. "This lady says that watching our video reminded her to call her sister and tell her she loves her. She says our family inspired her to not waste time on old grudges." Sarah smiled weakly. Even in her drugged state, she could appreciate the irony that their failed attempt to reach one person had ended up touching hundreds of strangers instead. "Maybe that's enough," she whispered. "Maybe that's the real miracle." But Jessica was not ready to give up. Tuesday afternoon, she received a direct message on Instagram from someone with a verified account, a country music journalist with over 1 million followers who wanted to write an article about their story. Wednesday morning brought a request from a local news station, asking if they could interview the family for their evening broadcast. "This is getting out of hand," Eleanor warned, clearly uncomfortable with the media attention their situation was attracting. "Your mother is very sick. She doesn't need the stress of reporters and cameras. She doesn't need people telling her what she can and can't handle either," Jessica replied sharply. "If Mom wants to do interviews, that's her choice." Sarah, despite her weakening condition, agreed to speak with the local news team. She wanted people to understand that their campaign was not about celebrity worship or seeking attention. It was about the power of music to heal, the importance of hope in dark times, and the love between a mother and her children. The interview aired on Wednesday evening and was picked up by the regional cable network. By Thursday morning, their original video had over 100,000 views and was being shared across platforms faster than Jessica could track. That Thursday afternoon, something unprecedented happened in the social media offices of Big Machine Label Group in Nashville. Sarah Martinez, a 25-year-old content coordinator whose job involved monitoring mentions of the label's artists, was scrolling through the hundreds of tags related to Reba McEntire when she came across a video that made her stop everything she was doing. Sarah Martinez had been named after the country music legend and had grown up listening to her music. She had taken this job partly because it allowed her to work in the industry that had shaped her childhood. She had seen thousands of fan videos over the years, but something about this particular story grabbed her attention and would not let go. The video showed a dying woman in a hospital bed, surrounded by concert memorabilia, and talking about how Reba's music had been her companion through divorce, single motherhood, and now terminal cancer. The woman's children, barely adults themselves, were fighting to make their mother's last wish come true against impossible odds. Their love for each other was evident in every frame, their desperation palpable and heartbreaking. Sarah Martinez watched the video 3 times before reaching for her phone to call her supervisor. She had never done anything like this before in her 2 years with the company, but she knew that some stories were too important to get lost in the noise of social media. What she did not know was that at that exact moment, 2 floors above her office, Reba McEntire herself was dealing with her own devastating loss. The country music legend had recently lost her beloved mother, Jacqueline, to cancer after a long and painful battle. The grief was still raw, the pain still overwhelming, and Reba had been struggling to find meaning in a world that suddenly felt much emptier. The call from Sarah Martinez would reach Reba's assistant within the hour. The video would be forwarded to Reba's personal phone by 5 o'clock that afternoon, and by 6:30 that evening, a private jet would be fueled and ready for an emergency flight to Tennessee, carrying a country music superstar on a mission that would surprise everyone involved, including herself. But in room 302 of Millerville General Hospital, none of this was known. Sarah Thompson was sleeping fitfully, her breathing shallow and labored. Jessica was researching experimental treatments on her laptop, still refusing to accept that medicine had reached its limits. Mark was reading aloud from the comments on their video, sharing messages of hope and love from strangers who had become unexpected companions in their journey. The miracle they had been praying for was already in motion, but like all the best surprises, it would arrive exactly when they had given up expecting it. Reba McEntire was sitting in her home studio in Nashville when her assistant, Maria Gonzalez, knocked softly on the door. It was nearly 7 o'clock on Thursday evening, and Reba had been staring at the same sheet of music for over an hour without really seeing it. Since her mother's death 6 weeks earlier, creativity had become elusive, replaced by a grey fog of grief that made even simple tasks feel overwhelming. "I'm sorry to bother you," Maria said hesitantly, "but there's something I think you need to see. One of the social media coordinators at Big Machine forwarded this video, and honestly, I can't stop thinking about it." Reba looked up from her guitar, noticing the unusual emotion in Maria's voice. In 5 years of working together, she had never seen her typically composed assistant look so affected by anything work-related. "What kind of video?" Reba asked, setting down her guitar and accepting Maria's tablet. "It's about a woman in Tennessee who's dying of cancer," Maria explained quietly. "Her daughter made this video about how your music has helped their family through everything. Reba, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, and the most heartbreaking." Reba pressed play and watched as Sarah Thompson's story unfolded on the small screen. Within the first minute, she felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition so profound it made her hands tremble slightly. Here was a woman facing death with the same quiet dignity her own mother had shown. Here were children watching their mother slip away, just as Reba had watched Jacqueline fade, despite every medical intervention available. When Sarah began talking about how sweet dreams had comforted her during sleepless nights after her divorce, Reba felt tears starting in her eyes. When Jessica described her mother singing Survivor while doing housework, transforming mundane chores into acts of defiance against despair, Reba found herself remembering her own mother's strength in the face of impossible odds. But it was Mark's quiet confession about understanding his father's limitations through "The Greatest Man I Never Knew" that broke something open inside Reba's chest. She had written that song about her own complicated relationship with her father, never imagining it would help a teenage boy make sense of abandonment and disappointment. By the time the video ended, Reba was crying openly, the first real tears she had allowed herself since her mother's funeral. Maria waited quietly, understanding that this moment required space rather than words. "How long ago was this posted?" Reba finally asked, her voice thick with emotion. "The original video went up 5 days ago," Maria replied, "but it's been gaining momentum. The local news story aired yesterday, and it's been picked up by several regional networks. The family has no idea their story has reached this far." Reba wiped her eyes and watched the video again, this time focusing on details she had missed during her emotional first viewing. She noticed the careful way Sarah had arranged her memorabilia around the hospital room, creating a shrine to hope in the middle of despair. She saw how Jessica and Mark looked at their mother with fierce protective love, the same way Reba and her siblings had looked at Jacqueline during her final weeks. "Maria, what do we know about this family's situation?" Reba asked, her mind already working through possibilities. "I had Sarah Martinez from Big Machine do some research after she forwarded the video," Maria replied, pulling up notes on her phone. "Sarah Thompson, 42 years old, single mother in Millerville, Tennessee. That's about 2 hours east of here. Diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 6 months ago. According to the most recent news interview, doctors have given her less than a week." The words hit Reba like a physical blow. Less than a week. This woman who had found strength in her music, who had raised 2 remarkable children, who faced death with such grace, she had less than a week left. "I need to call my pilot," Reba said suddenly, standing up from her chair with more energy than she had felt in weeks. "Reba, what are you thinking?" Maria asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "I'm thinking that some things are more important than schedules and security protocols," Reba replied, already reaching for her phone. "I'm thinking that if music can give someone strength, then maybe the person who made that music has a responsibility to show up when it really matters." Maria had worked with enough celebrities to know that good intentions often collided with practical realities. "What about your schedule? You have the charity gala tomorrow night and the recording session on Saturday." "Cancel them," Reba said without hesitation. "Cancel everything until Monday, and call Dr. Patterson. I want to know what we can do to help with her medical expenses." "Reba, are you sure about this? Once you show up at that hospital, there's no controlling what happens next. The media attention alone could be overwhelming for a family that's already going through hell." Reba paused, considering Maria's concerns. She thought about her own mother's final days, how overwhelming it had been to deal with well-meaning visitors while trying to process grief and fear. But she also remembered how much it had meant when Johnny Cash had called personally after hearing about Jacqueline's diagnosis, how that 5-minute conversation had lifted her mother's spirits for days. "You're right about the media attention," Reba acknowledged. "So we do this quietly. No advance notice, no publicity. We go in, we spend time with this family, and we let them decide how public they want any of this to be." Maria nodded, understanding that when Reba made up her mind about something this important, there was no changing it. "I'll call Tom and have the plane ready within the hour. Do you want me to arrange hotel rooms in case we need to stay overnight?" "Yes, but book them under your name," Reba replied. "And Maria, pack my guitar. If I'm going to do this, I want to be able to give them music, not just a celebrity visit." While Maria made the necessary arrangements, Reba sat alone in her studio and thought about the strange circularity of life. For 30 years, her music had been reaching people in their darkest moments, offering comfort and strength to strangers she would never meet. Now, in the middle of her own grief, she was being called to step out from behind the music and offer that comfort face to face. The flight to Eastern Tennessee took 90 minutes. Reba spent most of it staring out the window at the landscape below, thinking about Sarah Thompson and trying to imagine what she would say when she walked into that hospital room. How do you meet someone who is dying? How do you honor their story without making it about yourself? Tom Mitchell, her pilot for over a decade, kept the flight smooth and quiet, understanding without being told that this was not a typical work trip. When they landed at the small regional airport outside Millerville, there was no red carpet, no waiting crowd, no fanfare of any kind. Just a rental car and a GPS route to Millerville General Hospital. Reba had been to hundreds of hospitals over the years for various charity events and publicity appearances, but driving through the quiet streets of this small Tennessee town felt different. This was not about photo opportunities or public relations. This was about one human being reaching out to another in a moment of ultimate vulnerability. The hospital was smaller than she had expected, a modest brick building that looked like it had been serving the community for decades. Reba parked in the visitor lot and sat for a moment, gathering her courage. She had performed for audiences of 50,000 people without feeling nervous, but the prospect of walking into Sarah Thompson's room made her hands shake. She entered through the main lobby, carrying only her guitar case and a small bouquet of flowers she had picked up at the hospital gift shop. The elderly volunteer at the information desk looked up with the kind of polite smile reserved for visiting family members. "Can I help you find someone?" the woman asked. "I'm here to see Sarah Thompson," Reba replied quietly. "Room 302. The volunteer checked her computer screen, then looked up with a slightly confused expression. "Are you family? I don't have you on the approved visitor list." Reba hesitated. She could explain who she was, which would likely cause a commotion that might disturb other patients and their families. Or she could try a different approach. "I'm a friend," she said simply. "Sarah has been hoping I could visit." Something in Reba's tone must have conveyed the importance of this moment, because the volunteer's expression softened. "Third floor, take the elevator to your right. But visiting hours end at 9 o'clock. Reba glanced at her watch. It was 8:15. She had 45 minutes, which would have to be enough. The elevator ride to the third floor felt endless. When the doors opened, she found herself in a quiet hallway, lined with patient rooms. A few family members moved between rooms, their faces showing the strain of long vigils and difficult conversations. This was a place where ordinary people faced extraordinary challenges, with whatever strength they could muster. Room 302 was halfway down the hall. The door was partially open, and she could hear soft voices inside. Jessica reading aloud from what sounded like social media comments, Mark responding with occasional questions or observations. There was no sound from Sarah herself. Reba stood outside the door for a full minute, listening to this family's private conversation and wondering if she was about to intrude on something sacred. Then she remembered Sarah's face in the video, the way she had talked about music being her companion through every crisis, and she knew that some intrusions were actually invitations. She knocked softly on the door frame. "Come in," Jessica called, assuming it was another nurse or doctor. Reba pushed the door open and stepped into the room, her guitar case in one hand and flowers in the other. For a moment, time seemed suspended as three people stared at her in complete shock. Jessica's phone slipped from her hands and clattered to the floor. Mark's mouth dropped open, his eyes wide with disbelief, and Sarah, propped up against her pillows with an oxygen cannula in her nose, blinked slowly, as if she might be hallucinating. "Hi," Reba said quietly, her voice gentle but steady. "I'm Reba. I heard you might like some company." The silence that followed was profound, filled with the weight of an impossible wish suddenly becoming reality. Then Jessica burst into tears, and Mark stumbled backward into the wall, and Sarah whispered something that sounded like a prayer of gratitude. "I don't understand," Jessica managed between sobs. "How are you here? How did you know?" Reba set down her guitar case and moved closer to Sarah's bed, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "I saw your video, I saw your story, and I had to come." Sarah stared at her with wonder, as if she were seeing an apparition that might disappear if she blinked too hard. "You came all the way from Nashville?" "Honey, I would have come from the moon if I'd needed to," Reba replied gently, reaching for Sarah's hand. "Your daughter told the most beautiful story about how music helped your family through hard times. I couldn't let that go unanswered." The touch of Reba's hand seemed to convince Sarah that this moment was real. Fresh tears streamed down her gaunt cheeks as she squeezed the fingers of the woman whose voice had been her companion through every crisis of her adult life. "I can't believe you're actually here," Sarah whispered. "I've dreamed about meeting you for 25 years, but I never imagined it would happen like this." "Sometimes the best meetings happen in the most unexpected places," Reba said, settling into the chair beside the bed. "Tell me about yourself, Sarah. I want to know about the woman behind that incredible story." For the next hour, time seemed to stop in room 302. Sarah found strength she didn't know she still possessed, talking about her life with an animation that surprised everyone, including herself. She told Reba about growing up poor in rural Tennessee, about falling in love with country music as a teenager, about the first time she heard fancy and realized that poverty didn't have to define her future. Jessica and Mark sat transfixed as their mother shared stories they had never heard before. They learned about the time Sarah had driven 8 hours to see Reba perform in Atlanta, sleeping in her car because she couldn't afford a hotel room. They heard about how she had played Survivor on repeat during the nights after their father left, using the song as both lullaby and battle cry. "Your music saved my life more times than I can count," Sarah told Reba. "When David left us, I thought about giving up. I thought maybe the kids would be better off with their father and his new wife. But then I heard you sing about being a survivor, about how we're stronger than we think we are, and I realized I had more fight left in me." Reba listened with the kind of focused attention that made Sarah feel like the most important person in the world. Here was a superstar who could have been anywhere, doing anything, choosing instead to sit in a small hospital room and honor the story of an ordinary woman facing extraordinary circumstances. "Sarah, can I tell you something?" Reba said quietly. "6 weeks ago, I lost my mother to cancer. She fought it for 2 years, and watching her go through that was the hardest thing I've ever experienced. When I saw your video, when I saw your children loving you the way they do, it reminded me that music isn't just entertainment. It's connection, it's hope, it's love made audible." The revelation that Reba was dealing with her own fresh grief added another layer of meaning to her presence. This wasn't just a celebrity fulfilling a fan's wish. This was one human being reaching out to another in shared understanding of loss and love. "I'm so sorry for your loss," Sarah said, her voice full of genuine compassion despite her own circumstances. "Your mother raised an incredible woman. I can see her strength in you." Eleanor Hawkins chose that moment to enter the room for Sarah's evening medication check. The head nurse stopped dead in her tracks, her professional composure cracking as she recognized the woman sitting beside her patient's bed. Excuse me, I'm sorry, but visiting hours ended 20 minutes ago," Eleanor stammered, clearly struggling to process what she was seeing. Reba looked up with a gentle smile. "I know, and I apologize for the intrusion. I'm Reba McEntire, and I came to visit Sarah. Would it be possible to have just a little more time?" Eleanor stared for a moment, then looked at Sarah's face, more animated and alive than it had been in weeks, and made a decision that would have surprised anyone who knew her reputation for strict rule enforcement. "Take all the time you need," she said quietly. "I'll make sure nobody disturbs you." As Eleanor left the room, shaking her head in amazement, Reba reached for her guitar case. "Sarah, would you mind if I played something for you?" Sarah's eyes widened. A private concert from Reba McEntire had been beyond even her wildest dreams. She nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Reba tuned her guitar with practiced efficiency, then looked directly at Sarah. "I want to play Sweet Dreams for you, but first I need you to know something. I wrote that song during a difficult time in my own life, when sleep felt impossible and tomorrow seemed too far away. But sitting here with you tonight, seeing your courage and your children's love, I understand that song in a new way. Sometimes sweet dreams aren't about sleeping peacefully. Sometimes they're about the beautiful moments that make all the struggle worthwhile." She began to play, her voice filling the small room with warmth and melody. Sarah closed her eyes and let the music wash over her, but these weren't the recorded versions she had listened to countless times. This was Reba's voice, live and unfiltered, singing directly to her. Jessica and Mark held hands, watching their mother experience pure joy in what they knew might be her final days. When the song ended, Reba continued playing, moving through Sarah's favorites with an intimacy that transformed the sterile hospital room into something sacred. She played Survivor with a strength that reminded everyone present that survival comes in many forms. She played The Greatest Man I Never Knew with a tenderness that acknowledged the complexity of human relationships and the power of forgiveness. During Fancy, something magical happened. Sarah began singing along, her voice weak but determined. Jessica and Mark joined in, and soon all four of them were singing together, creating a moment of pure connection that transcended celebrity and illness and fear. "Sarah," Reba said when the impromptu concert ended, "I have something to tell you. Your story, your family's love, the way you faced this illness with such grace, it's inspired me to write again for the first time since my mother died. Would it be okay if I wrote a song about you? About finding strength in music and love in the darkest times?" Sarah could barely speak through her tears. "You would do that for me?" "I would do that because of you," Reba corrected gently. "Your story needs to be told. Other people need to know that hope is always possible, even when everything seems impossible." As the evening deepened, Reba made several phone calls that would change the Thompson family's life in ways they couldn't have imagined. She spoke with her management team about organizing a benefit concert for pancreatic cancer research. She called her record label about fast-tracking the recording of Sarah's song. She even contacted Dr. Patterson, one of the country's leading oncologists, arranging for a consultation about experimental treatments that might extend Sarah's time with her children. But perhaps most importantly, she simply stayed. While Jessica and Mark dozed in their chairs, Reba sat beside Sarah's bed, holding her hand and talking quietly about life, music, and the mysterious ways that people find each other when they need it most. "Reba," Sarah whispered as dawn light began filtering through the hospital window. "I need to tell you something. Even if I don't make it through this, tonight made everything worth it. You gave me the most beautiful gift. You showed my children that miracles are real." "Sarah, you gave me a gift too," Reba replied. "You reminded me why I make music in the first place. It's not about awards or chart positions. It's about moments like this, when songs become bridges between hearts." 6 months later, Sarah Thompson was still alive, defying every medical prediction and continuing treatments that Reba's intervention had made possible. The song "Sarah's Light" had become Reba's biggest hit in years, with all proceeds funding pancreatic cancer research. Jessica had graduated high school and was planning to study music therapy in college. Mark had started learning guitar, inspired by that night in the hospital when music transformed everything. But the real miracle wasn't Sarah's extended survival, or the success of the song, or even the medical breakthroughs that her story had helped fund. The real miracle was simpler and more profound. The proof that hope, love, and human connection could overcome any obstacle, transform any darkness, and create beauty in the most unlikely places. On the first anniversary of that extraordinary night, Reba returned to Millerville General Hospital, not as a celebrity fulfilling a wish, but as a friend keeping a promise. She found Sarah in the hospital garden, weaker than before, but still fighting, still surrounded by the love of her children and the music that had carried them all through their darkest hours. "How are you feeling, my friend?" Reba asked, settling beside Sarah on a garden bench. Sarah smiled, the same radiant expression she had worn that first night when impossible became possible. "Like a survivor," she said simply, "like someone who learned that the most beautiful dreams are the ones we never dared to dream." As the sun set over the small Tennessee town, two women who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances sat together in comfortable silence, proving that sometimes the greatest gifts come not from getting what we wish for, but from discovering that we are worthy of miracles we never thought to ask for. The story of Sarah Thompson and Reba McEntire became legend in Millerville and far beyond, but those who knew them best understood that the real story was simpler and more powerful than any legend could capture. It was about love, hope, and the extraordinary things that happen when ordinary people refuse to give up on the impossible.